louder. So it's my pleasure to be here today to share a little bit of my knowledge. I don't think it's as vast and depth as Caleb said. And my goal today is to sort of just take us through a little bit of what I call like a top 10 pathway through using digital media, mostly social media, for knowledge transfer. So the first thing I usually to talk about is sort of the benefits and challenges of using social media. So when social media first started, my experience was a lot of people gave it to a young intern in an organization and said, go have some fun. And as it spread and more people are on it, and I'll share some of those numbers with you, I think it became more of an actual tactic and part of a bigger strategy for most organizations. So there's lots of benefits about it. What it really has done is broken down a lot of barriers geographically, allowed us to get together closer, and share things when we can't physically get together. There's many different ways platforms work that allow us to share content different ways, including visually and videos. It allows you to diversify who your audience might be and share things. So there's a lot of good parts to it. There's also some challenges, and CROSH is a small organization as an example, and Caleb, who's running our webinar today, does this as part of a job that is much bigger than just doing digital media. So it does take resources and time. I think we've moved on from a volunteer or intern doing it on most organizations. And also you have to do some internal education and thinking about your members, your employees, your stakeholders, and how they can use it, so that they'll sort of fit into parts of the top 10 that I'll sort of share with you. And as always, it mostly seems to be working in English language. The majority of content seems to be, although there are pockets around the world in different languages, most of us will communicate in English. There is some bilingualism for Canada, but again, you'd have to be able to tweet and use both languages to do that. So this is sort of what I go through in the top 10. I'll go through sort of each step, and just sort of my idea on this is to share with you, because I'm unsure of the different experience of those of you who've tuned in today. So it's sort of at a level of giving you some ideas on how to use it as a strategy. And if you're interested in further content around either specifics about platforms or specifically how to use both listening tools and analytics, that's something I think you could share with CROSH, and we can do a more focused webinar later on. The first thing I want to talk about a little bit is how much this has exploded. So every year they re-up this graphic that tells us how much how much content is produced in 1 minute. And as you can see, there's quite a few. If you think about Twitter, which is what we're going to talk a lot more about, at least sort of examples from today, there's almost 500,000 tweets a minute being sent. I would hazard they're a little bit higher lately, basically being pushed by some of the content we've seen coming from south of the border. I think that number in the next year will be much higher. But every one of these different types of digital platforms has a lot of content all the time. And so the idea behind the type 10 is to give you an idea to get your content sort of to the right audience and in a way that it would stand out in this sort of now becoming big deluge of data. The first thing I always like to talk about is knowing who your audience is. And a lot of times I like to tell people that you're really not your audience. You might be part of your audience, but your audience can be much bigger. So generally I start with looking at the global snapshot of how many people are actually on social media platforms. So if you take a look at that, it's almost getting close to 2.8 billion people. So there's still many pockets in the world where it isn't a big thing. And I'll take you right through into some Canadian stats so you sort of drill down and understand what it means in at least the Canadian context. Around the world, you can see North America still is pretty high. There are pockets in some of the Asian countries that are equally as high in sort of use of it. And then we still have many countries in the world that have connection issues, that don't have the same distribution of technology. So depending on where you think your audiences are, if your company or your organization has worldwide audiences, you will know that social media and different platforms work very differently in different countries. So this is where Canada sits in the penetration of the country. So it's 63% of our population has social media accounts. So you can see we're on the upper end, which means that in terms of your organizations, if you're situated inside Canada, that you've got an audience sort of built out there that are already joined these platforms that you can actually think about how they're using them. So that's us. There we are, 23 million Canadians if you take that 63. So it's not a small number given the size of our population. That's a pretty vast audience is sitting out there waiting to see whatever content you might put out. And it's still growing. I think a lot of people think that digital media or social media accounts are sort of stagnating. And I think that this growth comes from two ends. To be on a platform, you're supposed to be 13 years of age. So we have that side of our demographic aging into platform use once they hit that number. And then you have the older group that is sort of migrating into social media. And I always like to talk about my 82-year-old mom who now has a Facebook page and is learning a little bit about it. She's a bit nervous about it, but at least there's a growing demographic of older people who sort of have gone onto some of these platforms, probably primarily Facebook, as a way to stay connected to family and friends. But again, the audience is still growing over time. How much time do we spend doing this? So just to think about how much time we spend on the internet via a mobile phone, which most of us carry in our pockets, more internet power than I remember having specifically when I was a student, which was no internet. To now, I think about the large first computers I had, and now I carry much more computing power in my pocket every day. And so we as a population have adjusted to this in the ways that we communicate and the ways we use these devices. And we're spending upwards of, close to 2 hours on just the internet or a mobile phone. But then take a look at specifically with social media. We're almost in the same realm. We're almost 2 hours of time on these various media platforms that have developed over time. So we're quite used to communicating on them as a general population. And the idea is thinking about how we use this for business purposes or knowledge transfer purposes. So I'll talk a little bit about the different platforms. Facebook is still really got the best set of demographics out there. It's the widest range in age and education and income. It's still growing. It's constantly changing as a platform. It never likes to talk about itself as a media platform, but in my opinion, it is a media platform. We've probably seen a lot of news articles lately about the role that Facebook and Twitter played in the U.S. election and the rise of things called bots and fake news, and a lot of those are because people realize that Facebook is a go-to place for news and for connections on a daily basis. So if we think about it, they have 2 billion monthly active users, and 75% of them spend 20 minutes on the site every day. So that's you, that's your employees, that's your targeted groups, your stakeholders. So it's a concerted amount of time in our busy schedules that we spend with these platforms, and that it really still has risen in population. Key to think also is Facebook has shifted a lot in the types of content, and we can all now produce our own videos. There's things called Facebook Live. And so in terms of becoming a production and distributing your content, there are many options inside Facebook now. In terms of Facebook in Canada, it's the #1 platform. It's neck and neck with YouTube, which I will talk less about because while YouTube is classified as social media, to me it's a repository of video versus a connection platform, which I view Facebook to be more of a connection platform, Twitter and Instagram, etc. But you can see that there are significant parts of the Canadian population on most of the major pop platforms that are used in social media today. And if you take a look at it, where they access it, there's still a lot of them on their phones. So you're thinking about people on commutes, people who are sitting at home in the evening. Sometimes you actually have another screen on and a TV or a computer, and you're on your phone and you're on Facebook. The percentage of the population still has decent spread amongst both demographics, and most people use it every single day who have an account. What do we know a bit more about the Canadian Facebook users? So you can see the smaller 13 to 17-year-old population. They might gravitate more to some of the newer tools like Snapchat, which we'll talk about briefly. But they still do have Facebook. I know that my nephews do, and they use it as a way to connect to us older people because they know we're there. And if you look at the gender breakdown, they're fairly similar in most of the categories, and shift a bit as we get older, and that has to do with just demographics that we have as we get older. So if you look at the age group in there, if you have young employees, the 18 to 24-year-olds are there, and the majority of us are probably between the 25 to 55 break. A big chunk of employees and stakeholders are on this platform. I'll switch to talk a little bit about Twitter. Twitter still has some growth going. It's an up and down platform in terms of a business model, but we still feel a lot of things happen on there and break on Twitter first. So that most things that are trending in the world will trend on Twitter first. It has a different demographic. It is definitely higher educated, sort of an age group of sort of 19 to 34. And in Canada, we have about 30% of the population, which is fairly high. In the United States, I think it's much less. And anywhere it ranges from 12 to sort of 25%. But it is got a business use. Most businesses, most organizations are on Twitter. A lot of examples I'll show today come from Twitter just because it's probably one of the best KTE platforms given the trending nature and the ability to engage with topics as they happen. I see Facebook as a great place to sort of engage with people, but also have content that stays sort of relevant longer. Twitter is a bit more in the moment and around events as they occur, like conferences or incidents, etc. I always give this warning because we do sometimes fun academic research, and that studies show that tweeting can be kind of addictive. So I'm probably one of the people that's got some addiction to it, and I think many more lately, just to see how the world is unfolding, and it happens on Twitter. Instagram is one of the newer, and by newer I mean last couple of years in terms of growth. It's still probably the highest growing platform, and it as well, much like Twitter, who now has live broadcasting, much like Facebook, Instagram keeps changing itself. Instagram is owned by Facebook, so there are some aspects that link Instagram and Facebook together. If you're hosting a Facebook business page, that gives you a better access through Instagram. But it shifted and went from just being a visual only, like a static visual, to videos, to stories. And you can see when we talk a little bit about the aspect of videos and storytelling, how this might work for your organization. But it is growing, and I can tell you that most of the younger people that we end up with as students here are on Instagram. So in consideration as a platform, also the visual nature of it allows you to show what your organization or your business does in a really good way. Snapchat is probably the newest one on the block, and I'm sort of glad that recently Snapchat agreed that they have some issues in their interface because I find it confusing. I don't use it a lot. My students use it, and I think it does have purposes. It's while it purports to be content that disappears, I'm always cautious to tell people nothing really disappears. So you might want to always take that with a grain of salt, that the content is there. So this is something I think that is evolving, and if they change, we might be better off to consider it. CROSH does use it, but I think it's still got some glitches, and it's a little bit different to build an audience on. So now we know a little bit about the platforms, we know a little bit about the audiences out there. I always think about, before you jump onto these platforms and before you jump into something, is thinking about the prep work you can do ahead of time. And I usually think about whys, questions you would ask yourself. Why would your stakeholders or employees care about you being on a certain platform? Why this one platform? Why Facebook, not Twitter? Why Twitter, not Facebook? Why should I be on all three, or should I be on four? Should I throw LinkedIn in? You need to understand why that platform works into your strategy, and does it actually add value to your communication strategy, right? And so it's understanding where you want to go with your strategy, and I always say that start with what you want to accomplish. So I'm sure many of you do this inside your organizations on a regular basis. So what's the strategy? You have organizational goals. What's your strategy around communication? And what's the story you have to tell? And we'll talk a little bit more about storytelling. And then thinking about how you could leverage each platform. Which one works for you? Does the nature of Facebook that allows more engagement and longer sort of life to your content work better? Do you want to be trending and in the moment with Twitter? And my advice always is, don't treat all platforms the same. And so because Facebook owns Instagram, you can link all your accounts if you put an Instagram up as an example, and you can say, hey, post the same content to Facebook and Twitter. I think you can use the same image, but I think your words can be different. Twitter now allows us 280 characters, so we can be a little bit longer. Facebook has much longer characters, and we know that Instagram is really very visual and driven by hashtags, so less wordy characters. So I think you can use images similarly, but you can treat your text very differently. The end point of most of this and engaging this should be about building a stronger community and audience for whatever your goal is or whatever your organization is. So that's where we get to storytelling. And to me, this is really key. I talk about this with my students a lot, and you think about the stories that you read as a child, or you might read to your own children now, and you can see how enthralled individuals get when you actually have a story. And it's the easiest way that you can actually get ideas and thoughts and emotions in your listeners' brains. And what we get with social media is the ability to put text and visual and videos together to tell our story. So think a bit about that when you start to craft content and how it might work on your platforms that you have. Some keys that might work is I always talk about making it personal. So how can you use content and visuals that actually make it personal? And this one works. I mean, it's don't let flu ruin your holiday season, right? And you want to spend time with your family and friends, and so this is the message and the way they're making it personal. And you can use it much more personal. People, particularly in occupational safety and health, will talk about injuries that they've come back from and tell their stories. And if you have aspects of that inside of even your research or your organization that you can share about sort of the success stories, those personal stories go a long way. Emotions play a lot of role in what we do with storytelling, and they can be serious emotions and they can be fun emotions. So, basically talking about buckling up and why people die, so that's sort of a fear emotion. And I think NIOSH did a good job with this one and sort of talking about the fun around Halloween and zombies, but linking it to shift working. So you can use humor, you can use emotions and fear and happiness, but when you can take those emotions and move them into visuals and text that work together is where you actually get really good engagement on your content. And also your message gets through to your audience. History works really well. If your organization's been around for a long period of time, you've had so many accident-free days, you want to celebrate that with your employees, you want to talk about the certifications that you have and how long you've had them. Celebrating milestones and using history are really important. And you can even use that in relation to improvements that have been made in occupational health and safety legislation or inside your own company and share those sort of milestones and historical moments. Then you should think about your employees. Your employees that you have here at CROSH, we have maybe not particularly always employees, but we have our student researchers, we have some particular employees, and how can you leverage them, but also let them tell your story. So as CROSH was doing here, CROSH uses some of the work that its employees are doing and leverage that in sort of content. So someone's obviously doing some great KTE and poster preparation. That also turns into great visuals that we can share on our site. And Caleb does a good job of creating those types of posts for us here. And then when individuals like Justin and Sandra, who grad student and supervisor, do amazing research, but also are sharing it around the world, you can actually use the content created somewhere else and share it on your own accounts. And empowering your employees to tell your story. So this is where you got to put a little bit of work in sometimes to sort of tell them what you want to do on your platforms and how you can actually get your messages across. And then they turned out creating content for you. Because again, in terms of resources, you only have so much time to create your own content inside your strategy, but employees can help you with that. And the important thing to think about is the number one reason that most people share content on social media is to let others know what they believe in and who they really are. So they'll share their own accomplishments, they'll share thoughts and feelings that they believe in, and even as far as safety and health in a workplace, if they truly believe in it and they're a part of your organization, they're more likely to share that type of content. And so here we've got cross-sharing content from one of our employees, Brandon, and his participation in Movember, right? So we're able to take his tweet and share it with the rest of our audience on CROSH, showing something that's happening with our employees and helping that employee to a goal that they're going on. And then we have Carolyn's post. So the students who work here spend some time with Caleb understanding what our messaging is and to know the story to tell, and then they're able to share theirs. So it's not always coming from our account, it can come from their accounts, and they get better at telling stories. And here Carolyn can tell it in French for us as well. And then Caleb and Brandon, who is now transitioned to be an employee, both sharing their experiences with different types of research they're doing. Again, we get good visuals. They understand the story they want to do. They learn things like tagging us in their posts so that we're alerted when they're actually sharing content and we can be a part of it. And then besides employees, a lot of organizations have stakeholders, right? And they'd be different for every kind of organization, whether it's shareholders to other companies and organizations you work with. So this is us sharing Giving Tuesday, which happened yesterday, and a partner who gave us some money, and sharing and thanking them. We also have affiliate researchers who are out there and sharing us and the work that we're doing here. And then we have other groups that come and see what we're doing, like the Ontario Mining Association, and share our content as well. And then I always say when somebody comes to visit you that might have a really good following or be influential in networks outside of the one you currently have, like Christy Duncan, who's the science minister, we took the opportunity to both use a visual with her, but also get and tag her in the account so that we can actually get some different people seeing our content. Again, another partner stakeholder that we work with, Workplace Safety North, sharing both a talk that we had here and our content, but also using us in one of their knowledge exchange meetings and sort of highlighting the knowledge coming from CROSH. Talk a little bit about videos and visuals, which we've seen a lot of already in terms of visuals. Importance are thinking about research showing that profile pictures are the first place people look, and pictures that have human faces get a lot more interaction. So you can see a lot of the ones we're showing you have actual humans in them and they're identifiable. So you can do something like this. This is a heat map following of my Twitter from a couple years ago. But you can see people look at your profile picture and then your header picture first. Some of you may have to put a logo for that profile picture, but think about what you want to have in that header picture. Is it your employees? Is it something happening inside your organization? And then you can also see that the next one is is a pin tweet. So pinning content in the top of your Twitter, again, is where eyeballs. Same thing for your Facebook page. It's where people look. And also people spend a lot of time looking at videos on their mobile phone. I can remember when you couldn't do this because it was very expensive, and now we can actually see most people streaming videos on their phone on a regular basis. So small short videos can draw attention to what you're doing. This is a short 2-second almost video. But again, when I'm scrolling through a timeline, both either on Facebook or on Twitter, the movement will catch my eye and I'll stop and read the content. The one thing you should know about doing videos on Facebook is that most people watch videos similarly with Twitter with the sound off. So there are mechanisms on the platforms to add subtitles and to actually have the text or transcript appear in it, so people can watch it at work or someplace where they can't have sound on and still see what your message is. Visual content. So this is always my demonstration about visual content being 40 times more likely to be shared. You know, I could read each one of these to you, or I could show it to you in a way that's much easier for you to grasp. You can see the actual impact of this content better. So thinking about marrying your text with visuals and cutting down the way that you talk, at least us academics, we have a lot of work to do in that area because we're used to writing big papers, but social media likes short, concise things. So again, here's some examples of taking something like falls, slips, and trips, and we can have some visuals. I'm assuming this is probably a poster and or a pamphlet that they also circulate, but it also has differences in colors, differences in sizes of text, and it has more visuals to it. And same with the Kai-Hai talking about opioid. It's a number with an arrow that tells us things are increasing. We can get that message much faster than even reading the text. I always like to talk about having a little bit of fun. So a really growing language really is emoticons, and you'll see more and more of this if you have teenagers or younger. They use these like crazy. And again, a little academic research to say that people who use emoticons are actually considered influential and popular, so I like to use them. But you can have fun with your content, okay? So this is Caleb sharing the CROSH crew loading up. And it was National Coffee Day. So there are every day a national some sort of a day. And there are pros and cons of jumping in them. But if something really works and it's sort of an innocuous day like National Coffee Day, and you have a group of your employees working and having coffee, getting ready for their day, not a bad way to share it. Institute for Work and Health shared a really interesting one about how do you deal with Movember and actually wearing PPE and using a mask. So again, thinking about the different types of facial hair that men can grow, and what does that mean in relation to PPE? So it has a little bit of humor to it, but it also has some good facts in it. This one is fun. It's Ontario Health looking at how do we get everybody to take their flu shot. So we're including Wonder Woman and the Flash, which are sort of popular culture characters that come with their own emojis, and a little GIF that moves. So again, scrolling, I'm going to get this content because my eye's going to catch it. She's topical. She's been one of the top movies in the last year. So linking their message with some pop culture about fighting the flu. So once you've thought about some of these things, there's other sort of 2 or 3 other things you can do. So the first thing is keeping an eye on what other parts of the industry are doing. So this is some of the stuff that Caleb keeps an eye on in relation to CROSH, and it can be different platforms. So it can be similar companies, it can be a similar company organization, but on a different platform. So I would say with us in CROSH, we're still sort of figuring out what we want to do with LinkedIn. And so we look at what other organizations are doing on LinkedIn. And so it's just how do they construct their content? What engagement do they get on what types of content? And how can I think about that in terms of building a strategy? If somebody's really good on a certain platform, you can easily see their content. It's mostly public, and you can spend a little bit of time seeing how it's been received and how it might work for your organization. So particularly before you jump into a platform, it's always good to spend some time looking at comparison type organizations. I could tell you that Wendy's Hamburgers is amazing on Twitter. They're funny, they're humorous, they do a lot. Not really an account that CROSH wants to emulate, right? So we have to look at our comparators, and so we do that on different platforms. So you can think of creating a list for your own organization or company, and who do you think is doing really well? What platforms aren't you on? Where would you like to go on those platforms? And who might be on there already? So it's a little bit of research and a little bit of data gathering, but can help you really fine-tune your strategy. And then you should always think about your audience and listen to them. What's great is all these platforms have a lot of built-in analytics that can tell you information. We all nowadays share a lot about ourselves on social media, such that what used to be very expensive market research and holding focus groups and doing surveys, you can get a lot of that information now just from the analytics on your platforms because of the content that we share as your audiences. So there's simple things. This is Tweeps Map, which allows you to see where's the CROSH followers around the world. And, this lets me know things about time zones and languages and where the majority of my population comes in terms of countries. There are other higher analytic products that would allow you to drill down into specific geographic areas, so you can do that. It'll also tell you what's happening in the last little while and how many people have engaged with your content, how many people have clicked on links related to your Twitter, and this again comes from the analytics themselves and or free tools like Buffer or Tweeps Map that you can have limited free accounts on, and you can use these to manage it. So I think this was from the CROSH tour, and it gave some idea of where the engagement has. It also gives you an idea about what time of day, right? So if you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, this goes back to knowing your audience from the very beginning, the first step. Is your audience on at 6 a.m.? And is it at 6 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific? Who is the audience and when are they on? And you can see from CROSH's metrics, it seems to work for us in Eastern Standard Time, sort of 11:30 through to sort of, the evening is where we're getting more of our engagement. So early morning content from us, especially when you think about Twitter and how fast content moves down timelines, may get lost. So key things we may want to put out later in the day, and if it's really key, we might want to pin it to the top of our Twitter profile so we get more content eyeballs to it when people click on our thing, on our actual account. So these are things to think about. This you can get, again, from the analytics and the platforms. And then it gives me interests, right? So most of the people following CROSH, interested in business news, movie news, which is interesting. So the Wonder Woman one might work if we chose to use that kind of a gift. Government, technology, science news. So we have a similar things. We also have comedy and movies. So we know that we could use some humor. We know that our audience has some shared interests and some specifics that we might want to consider if we're going to change some of our content up. And for instance, if we can link our research to technology and tech news, we can see that our audiences are pretty big in those areas as well. So what's my last thing to say to you before we open up for some questions is repeat. And this is like that feedback loop, right? What did I learn? What contents work really well? And at the end of that, how do I feed it back into my strategy and do it again? And hopefully it keeps improving every time we throw it back in. So just to show you the top 10 at the end, gone a little fast maybe for some of you. Trying to stay in the timeline and allow some questions. These are recorded, so you can always go back and go through the slides again. And particularly if you want to contact CROSH, here's our access information and my particular email address if you want to know more about either my research area or some of the content I presented today. So I don't know if we have some questions going on, Caleb?
Not yet, but I might have some. No, so again, if there are, just to reiterate for those who are watching online, that the chat box on the side, you can type in a question there, and I can relay that on to Dr. Pegoraro. I can now see that people are typing, so I'll let that happen.
Should we preview the next one? Or?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So while people are typing, I'll just and we'll go to the next slide. So this is our final webinar for this fall semester. So we ran one in September, October, and November. We'll pick up again in January with Dr. Thomas Merritt, who is a Canada Research Chair here at Laurentian University and a faculty researcher with CROSH, whose research in genomics and bioinformatics is looking actually at the physiology of fruit flies 2 kilometers underground at Snow Lab, and with the mindset of applying that to miners who are working underground in those contexts. So he will be much more much better at explaining that than I will, but that is just to foreshadow that upcoming webinar. So there is a question, and it says, which platform do you think would be most relevant to reach workers within the context of small business specifically? So again, in that framework of thinking of across Northern Ontario, there are many small businesses with fewer workers for them. So which platforms do you think would be most relevant there?
I think based on what we see in demographics and sort of usage, I think Facebook is probably the best There's been some really good research that shows that Facebook is used quite significantly in rural populations and farms and in remote areas. Again, I think because of its connectivity and how it builds, it actually works on connections versus Twitter is a bit more about push out content and a little bit of who you follow, but less likely to have the audience that Facebook would have. Particularly even small businesses, there's many tools inside Facebook that really lets you build your own business pages and add aspects to it that I think is unparalleled in the other ones. And then depending on what kind of business you're running, I think Instagram and its visuals can help. So for instance, I think about a small business that I follow where my cottage is on Manitoulin, and they have a great Facebook page where they can talk about their events and when they're opening, and then they share pictures of some of their products on Instagram. So both of those would work, and I think they sort of know that Facebook is the widest demographic and the most likely where the employees would be.
Perfect. So another comment or question is also a lot of the focus in health and safety across the province has been focused on young workers. So I just wanted to know if you had any comment on either the platform or the medium that you think would be most effective in reaching younger workers across the province, but specifically again thinking in Northern Ontario.
Right. So I think particularly your younger audiences, you won't find them on Facebook. I think you're going to find them both on Instagram and, if you want to delve into it, Snapchat. The difficulty, I think, with Snapchat is you spend a lot of time creating content that sort of disappears. Like they can only watch it within a 24-hour time period. I think it's good for instance, if I was putting out a young worker message every morning about a safety tip for the day or a safety focus, then I think Snapchat would work, as would a visual on Instagram. Instagram is, when I ask my students where do they go first time in the morning, they go to Instagram. And then some of them now go to Snapchat. So I think both of those have the younger audience, and it's where you're going to find them. And that's kind of key if you want to get your messages across, is both where they are, but also understanding how those platform works. And Snapchat has a lot of sort of silliness to it that allows you to sort of add accents and drawn pictures, and that helps get the message across. So you have to think a little bit about that audience. But I would think Instagram's your safest first bet while you start to learn and understand Snapchat.
Perfect. So there's another question that speaks to the design of the resources. So the question from Rob is, do you make many of your own infographics or visuals, or are there resources out there that can help you with that, and what might be some examples? So I don't know if you want to take part A, and I could.
Sure. So I can tell you Caleb makes those graphics for us. There are free user accounts and very inexpensive ones that you can upgrade to. Two particular ones we use a lot are Canva, so it's CANVA, and PictoChart, which is PIKTO chart. Both of those have free accounts. They allow you to import your own visuals, to overlay text on visuals. But Caleb probably can speak the best about which works. I think for me, Canva works quick because it actually creates templates that are scaled for being on Instagram, for being Facebook, for Facebook covers. So it already sets the sizes, so you don't have to work on that. And I think they kind of make you look pretty awesome fast.
Yeah. So that's a great question, Rob, because a lot of the time it's like, that's great, I would like to make visuals. How do I necessarily do that? I would obviously, whenever I'm sitting down to work on a project, I'd just like to sort of take a step back and look at the big picture again of what is the main message that I am trying to convey in a resource. So if you think of even back to the slide or the cover for this webinar that I had made, was that for this webinar, the main message that I wanted to get across was that Anne was going to be speaking on all forms of digital media, and that there was a webinar. So just again, simplify the main message that you would like to get across in a visual. A lot of times you might
there we are.
clutter it up with all different types of things, and so every element that you add on, how is that reinforcing what the main message is that you were trying to get across about this?
Yeah, so this is simple. This is did you do this one in Canva?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you can import all those icons. Some of them are already existing inside. If you actually get a paid Canva, which is not that expensive, there's a whole bunch of stock images you can use. And it allows you to simply look like an amazing designer in a short period of time. And Caleb, I think, has mastered these better than I have. I try to use them, and I'm a little bit less technology savvy than he is, and I can still produce something fairly good. Most of the ones that weren't screen captures that I showed you, I created in either Canva or PicoChart myself. So I think the industry is shifting, knowing that the visuals are so important, and have made these tools. If you remember, we used to all have to figure out how to use Adobe, like high res software that amazing graphic designers do. Smaller organizations can do these things themselves now at a pretty high quality.
Yeah, and the other point that I would make really is that understanding the use of the resources. So something like the visual you see on your screen now, advertising this webinar, I know it's going to be used for a very short period of time, really, to advertise this webinar in the few weeks that led up to today, and then really it won't be used again. So the allocation of resources to developing this in terms of my time was sort of limited by that. There are resources that we have developed with CROSH that we know we plan to use them over a period of months or years and across a variety of contexts. And in that time, we're not either afraid to spend more time developing them internally or working with a design firm for some ideas or concepts and mock-ups. And there are several ones that you can access locally in the Sudbury area, but again, across Northern Ontario, across the province. So that's hopefully that answers your question.
And feel free to email us, Rob, if you didn't get the names of the tools. We're happy to respond to them.
Yeah, I've tried to type them in here. So I'm now trying to triage a couple of questions here at the same time. So there's another question here. I'll just read it for you. So we currently message various things such as outages and that more like announcements, broadcasting announcements, and that on Twitter, and also send out the odd safety message over our internet. But to reach a broader audience, would you suggest getting on another communication platform such as Facebook and getting that account going to relay, daily, weekly, set out incremental messages to the audience, or just remain sort of where they are?
So, I mean, I think Twitter is really good for those sort of triaging and quick messages. An account that does that fairly well here locally is our Hydro Greater Sudbury Utilities. When we have an outage, they're very good and quick, and I think people go to Twitter for those immediacies. For sort of daily messages and things you want to maybe last a bit longer and people can go back and revisit easier, I think both Facebook and Instagram would let you do that, because both of them allow you to pin content. You can promote content for fairly inexpensive amounts of money, particularly on Facebook, and have it reach a broader geographic audience for yourself if you're trying to get that message out. But I think Facebook is a place where people are used to spending more time than they particularly do on Twitter because of the mechanisms of both those platforms. So for a longer message of the day, sort of a safety message of the day, which you could include video and a few other things, I think Facebook would work fairly well for that. And if you have a younger audience in your employees or your stakeholders, then I think Instagram as well.
Perfect. So I think we've got time for one more that may be a bit of a tricky one to answer. But if there's a company that is currently not using any platforms, and so they're looking to start to use one, let's just say the example here is given is they're going to start using Twitter to share health and safety messages. How much time do you perceive that organization needs to set aside to have the staff person now running the account? Since we've moved on from, like you said at the very outset of your presentation,
right,
have an intern do that sort of on the side.
Yes.
So what allocation of resources do you feel that would be needed to get an organization up off the ground and into the game?
Okay, so the first thing I would say before we get into resources is if you're not on platforms, my advice to you is to go out there and grab your accounts on platforms before somebody else does. So your usernames and what you want to use may already be taken. It'd be great if you went and grabbed them, and they can stay dormant. So I would go out and grab them on most platforms you have. In terms of time, depending on how tech savvy your employee is. If there's somebody who's already got their own personal Facebook account, which most people probably do, it'll take them less time to sort of morph that into understanding some of the business aspects of it. If they've never been on Twitter, I think you're probably going to have to invest a little bit of time in sort of starting your account, or at least them having a private account and starting to sort of what I would say lurk around on Twitter and see what works, like I said in the research, and following it. So I think that would take some time. If again you want to start creating visuals, we're upping our time and looking at things like understanding tools and being able to create visuals to add into um, both Instagram, etc. So the time is increasing in terms of employee investment because the platforms themselves are increasing in terms of their capabilities, flexibilities, and add-ons. So I would think you want to have a time, you want to have a launch date and sort of spend some time leading up to that. So if you wanted to have yourself on certain accounts in 3 months, then you want to make sure you get those accounts. You want your employee to start understanding how to build content and how those platforms work and their algorithms to keep your content high. And there's a learning curve, and there's lots of online resources that you can subscribe to for free that will tell you tips and tricks for different platforms that should help with your time. But I would caution that if you are going to do this, then yeah, you need to consider this an investment both in human resources and in time.
Perfect. So that will wrap up our time. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. There is a generic sort of email address, CROSH@Laurentian.ca, that you can get a hold of us by email. I believe the slide before here has Dr. Pegoraro's contact information directly. And again, we probably should, at a minimum, end by saying you can follow along CROSH on Twitter or Instagram.
Yes, we should.
Any of the handles that are there that you see, CROSH_CRSST, so our bilingual name, you can follow us along on any of those platforms. And just a reminder that the email will go out with the registration details for our January webinar at the end of January. Again, sticking with the last Wednesday of every month in the new year. So thank you all for attending, and
feedback's always welcome. So if you want to send us any feedback about this presentation, about future stuff you'd like to see, either in relation to this or in other topics, I think CROSH is always open to that kind of interaction with anyone who wants to ask us questions or provide new content. So thanks very much. I appreciate the audience today.
Thank you.